It had a practical effect, didn't it? Those directors who resigned because they obviously were offended by the sale, they saw something wrong with it. Those directors who resigned refused to appear before you because they feared that somebody might act against them. And the Premier, as I understand it, would not give a guarantee that they would not be the subject of illegal action, say for defamation.
I was pleased the Premier and the Treasurer did appear, because they were saying the committee was not legal, but they did appear when we requested them to attend. And I questioned the Premier on that very issue and said, will you give an assurance that you will not sue these 8 directors if they give evidence before the committee? And she said, I will not give that assurance. So putting it another way, she was threatening to sue them. And that was enough to intimidate the 8 directors who resigned. They were given at midnight, I think it was the 14th of December, please sign these contracts. They quickly read them and said, we can't sign them, it's a dud deal. Now these 8 directors were appointed by the Labor government, by the Labor Treasurer. They were obviously very supportive of the Labor government. One of them was a former Labor minister. So they were not Liberal Party stooges making life difficult for our Labor government. They honestly believed it was a bad deal, and as directors they had a responsibility to those companies. So they said to the Treasurer, we won't sign it, and he virtually gave them no option but to resign. He then replaced them with virtually people from his own staff and said, now you sign it, and they of course all signed the contracts. So it's a question whether even those sale documents were really strictly legal.
Yes, I suppose one could challenge the independence of the new appointees.
That's right, who had no director's responsibility for those companies. They were given it artificially for those few minutes to sign. And so it was a very serious development, and I spoke to some of those directors, and I actually spoke to Michael Knight, and he indicated that if he did give evidence it would be in the form of a bombshell. So that's why the government was ferocious in its attempts to gag those 8 directors from appearing before the committee.
Do you think the public were entitled to know what the directors would have had to say?
They have a right to know. These are public companies, they're owned by the taxpayer. They have a right to know, and now they've been sold, and the deal was a dud deal because the $5.3 billion the Treasurer boasted he had achieved this good sale evaporated when we started to investigate all the various subsidies and other incentives to the commercial area to purchase or to make a tender. So we found out he'd offered to have a complete coal mine constructed to supply cheap coal to anyone who purchased these particular power assets. Now that coal mine would cost $1.2 billion to actually create it, plus the subsidy every year, because they were offering the coal at $30 odd a tonne when it could have been $80 a tonne. So it's going to be an ongoing subsidy for 10 or 20 years. So all of that undermined or weakened that $5.3 billion, plus the fact that the taxpayer would have got $600 million a year as it was getting in profit going into the state revenue. That $600 million stopped. In 10 years, $600 million is $6 billion. So the loss of income plus the subsidies watered down that $5.3 billion to probably around $600 or $700 million.
Thank you, Mr. Nile.